Human faces are high-priority survival stimuli. When we encounter a potential threat, our biology reacts instantly, initiating a response before the conscious mind registers it. The facial action coding system, developed in the 1970s, catalogs the muscle movements that universally encode these emotions. When you see a cue like the tensing of the corrugator supercilii muscle, you instinctively mimic it. Instantly, this micromimicry triggers autonomic arousal, shifting your body into a state of heightened readiness. For decades, cognitive therapies, influenced by Aaron Beck's 1976 schema model, assumed this process malfunctioned in the socially anxious because of their conscious beliefs. This led to the Evaluative Deficit Hypothesis, the idea that social anxiety is driven by a conscious misinterpretation of trivial cues as dangerous. This assumption provided a logical framework for practitioners using verbally mediated therapy, as it allowed them to target a patient's irrational labels through logical reappraisal. However, recent empirical data suggests that this evaluative deficit does not exist. Social phobics appear to decode facial expressions with accuracy, suggesting their pathology is located in a system that operates below the threshold of awareness. If the biological error occurs during these first milliseconds of mimicry and arousal, then standard cognitive therapy is simply addressing a late stage of processing that has already missed the moment of failure. To find where the error actually lies, researchers use facial expression decoding tasks to measure a patient's explicit judgment. In 2005, researchers Philitot and Douillet used facial schematics that morphed in 30% steps from neutral to full emotional intensity. Participants were instructed to rate the intensity of the faces and categorize the specific emotion they observed. Non-anxious control groups established a baseline of high accuracy, correctly identifying the emotions as the expressions became clearer. When the data for patients with social phobia was plotted, their accuracy line tracked perfectly with the control group. There was no statistical difference in how accurately each group explicitly judged the faces. Pediatric studies corroborate this, showing that socially anxious children are no more likely to mislabel neutral or positive faces than their peers. A social phobic knows exactly what an angry face looks like, and they can conceptually distinguish it from a neutral one with the precision of anyone else. If the conscious evaluation of the face is correct, where exactly does the cognitive error occur? Since appraisal is intact, the root cause of the overwhelming threat perception must be a failure in how the brain gathers visual data, not how it interprets it. This moves the scientific investigation towards spatial visual attention, specifically where the eyes are directed before the person is even aware of it. The dot probe task provides a way to measure this. A subject looks at a screen displaying two faces side by side, one angry and one neutral. The faces disappear after 500 milliseconds, and a target dot appears in the exact spatial coordinates previously occupied by one of those faces. The speed at which the subject reacts to the dot serves as a physical map of their attention. A faster response indicates their visual spotlight was already oriented toward that specific location. Individuals with high trait anxiety consistently respond faster when the dot replaces an angry face, demonstrating a profound orienting bias toward threat. To test for automaticity, researchers flashed the angry face for only 30 milliseconds before covering it with a neutral mask, preventing any conscious image from forming. Even under these subliminal conditions, the physical orienting bias and muscle mimicry persist. The anxious brain reacts to the threat well before the visual cortex can render the image for the conscious mind. This is the mechanism of pre-attentive processing. Threat cues physically hijack the brain's attention before conscious perception can even begin. The clinical literature contains a conflict regarding how social phobics allocate their attention. While some studies show hypervigilance, others show that social phobics actively look away from faces and toward neutral household objects. This presents a paradox. The patient appears simultaneously fixated on the threat and actively avoiding it. Nader Amir's two-stage model of information processing resolves this by mapping attention across time. In the first half second, there is an involuntary orienting toward the threat. The attention is pulled toward the face. But as exposure continues past 1 second, the focus shifts into controlled cognitive avoidance. The patient averts their gaze to escape the overwhelming internal discomfort triggered by the initial arousal. This hypervigilance avoidance sequence is the mechanism that maintains the disorder. When the eyes move away before they can gather enough data, the patient loses the opportunity to consciously realize the threat was a false alarm. Because the gaze shifts before the mind can process the data, the initial alarm is never updated by a rational assessment of the situation. This data requires a new cognitive architecture, one that accounts for what happens in those first 30 milliseconds. Mogg and Bradley's cognitive motivational model separates the brain's response into two distinct systems. The valence evaluation system acts as an automatic radar, continuously scanning for survival-relevant signals. Upon detecting a threat, it commands the goal engagement system to direct spatial attention toward that target. In this model, valence evaluation refers to rapid biological relevance, not a slow, conscious semantic label. This explains why therapy focusing strictly on verbal reappraisal struggles to reach the root of severe social anxiety. If the error occurs before a thought can even form, then effective treatment must account for that automaticity. Clinical interventions are shifting towards attentional retraining, paradigms designed to adjust the brain's baseline visual orienting habits. The face acts as a high-priority biological signal, optimized by evolution to bypass conscious thought and demand immediate physiological attention. Clinical success relies on training the brain's alarm system on where to look, rather than lecturing the conscious mind on what it has seen.